Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, we're going to be going over a full timing belt, water pump, and replacing seals on the GX470. I've got an oil leak right now that's coming from the top of the engine. I believe it's the valve cover gasket. I have a separate video for that, for changing the valve cover gasket, because it's kind of all the same process. But on today's video, we're just going to go over the actual timing belt, water pump, and then the oil seals that are involved once you take that all apart. So stay tuned. So go ahead and start this timing belt service. What I'm going to do is drain the radiator and start unhooking the radiator hoses and all that. You can do this whole project with leaving the radiator in here, but I'm gonna go ahead and just take it all out just to free up more space to work and do stuff in front of the engine. This thing does come off just the shroud here and just all the parts, and you could have plenty of room, but I just want to be sure that I have that extra space just to work, and then just take this whole thing out after I drain it. To drain the radiator, you basically just need to take this plug right here on the driver's side, just unscrew it by hand right here, and then once you do it, you'll just drip straight down into that faucet right there. So I'm gonna just drain it into this bucket right now. You don't want to take it all the way out because it's going to spew out the back way. You just want it to drip out slowly down to here so you can control it. If you want to have it gushing out, then you could just take the plug out, but I'm just gonna let this thing drain right here. So we got it all drained. One of the things you want to do as you're draining, make sure you squeeze this hose up here on the top to bring in some of the fluid to flow out. There is still going to be a bunch of fluid in here that I can't get out. One of the things I noticed when I was looking at this was things got a replacement Denso radiator right here. It's got the basically the Denso aftermarket part number, and it's also made in Indonesia. The original ones would have been made in Japan, so this is a $180 replacement. That's still a Denso that's made outside of Japan. But obviously whoever replaced this one, they probably did not replace the radiator cap, which I'm surprised it didn't come with a new radiator cap when they replaced it. But this one, you know, broke, and then I doubt they replaced the hoses either, because of everything on here kind of still looks original 16-year-old hose to me, so I don't trust it. That's why I ordered all the replacements for this. So the rest of the way to take this thing off is, what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect the hose right here from the actual engine block. I'm going to turn it vertically so I don't spill anything out. I'm going to disengage this side so I could turn this hose too so it goes vertical. On this side, I'm going to clamp it right here. So if you see the OEM clamps, you want to reuse these OEM clamps because they're the best ones. You pull them back and then they clip into this little clip right here. On all the radiator clamps, they have that. So when you clip that, basically it holds it open, and then you can slide it anywhere along the hose you want to make sure that you keep it on the hose and it doesn't fly off and it doesn't get in the way once you're trying to get this thing off. Once you do that, you take this off, slide it onto the new hose, and then when you're ready to line up everything with the marks and all that, so the radiator, so the OEM comes with this marking. It comes with another mark right here that you want to line up the same spot, and then you just release that clamp and it clamps it back down. Like this one, you could tell it's been replaced because usually when you line up that spot with that actual line also, because that's where you have the best angle to get some pliers in there. So right here, it's going to be the best angle. This is not the greatest angle right here. One thing I saw, they put a zip tie right here when this spot doesn't need a zip tie. This thing goes in here. It's a low pressure line. Maybe somebody zip tied it because of this thing was building up pressure and it wasn't holding because of the cap, so maybe that's why it was blowing that out, but I don't know why. But anyway, I'm not going to put that back on once we're finished with this job. There's two transmission cooler hoses, one right here and then one at the bottom down there that we got to undo, and those you got to be careful because they're going to have transmission fluid in them. So what I would usually do is I disconnect both of them, and then whatever drops out is going to drop out, but anything that doesn't, I'm going to go ahead and try to connect these two. That way the fluid just stays constant in there. The tube goes underneath and it actually comes out right here on the secondary trans cooler. So this hose right here goes all the way down underneath the car and over the top on the other side. Once we do all that, I'll go ahead and take this reservoir off. So this reservoir's got 3 10mm, one right here, and there's one down there, but looks like they didn't put the 10mm back on when they did the replacement, so I'm gonna have to go ahead and take care of that when I put that back together. The last thing you want to do is take the fan off. So the fan, you can unbolt the 4 10mm that are onto the actual pulley right here on the engine side, and you get, once you unbolt all those and turn the motor or turn the crank, you can get to the other ones on the back side of it and then take it out as one big unit right here. Alright, went ahead and got everything off. I even took the fan apart. I couldn't get it past this shroud, so you actually have to take the shroud and the fan kind of off together. The main thing with the shroud is it's held on by the 10mm up here. Underneath there's nothing, it kind of slides into a clip, but the 2 hoses for the actual transmission cooler, they actually have a clip that go into the shroud. On here, since the last person broke one of them, it kind of just popped right out. The second one was in an odd location. It looks like it's clipped into like a 10mm holding thing, but I popped that thing out and it actually broke also. So one of the steps to take off the shroud and the fan is you have to unbolt these things. At first I tried to pop them out, and the last person did too, and it broke it because it goes into this piece right here on the actual shroud itself. It clips into that and it holds it into the shroud. So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to just leave this in the shroud and unclip it. You can see how easy it is to unclip. Just get a flat head in there and just kind of stick it straight into there, and it pops right out, and you can release the whole hose. So now I gotta replace all these plus that missing one right there, which is $2 or $3, but I still have to order that part just to replace it. So most timing belt services, this is all the room we really need to do the work. But since I said earlier I'm gonna take the radiator out just to give me a little bit more working room here so I don't damage the radiator, and I can put a gun in here and shoot the pulley off and everything, I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect that lower transmission fluid right there. I'm using this little barb thing right now just to seal that up. I'm gonna go ahead and get 2 little plugs too to plug the radiator side so it doesn't drip everywhere, and then pull the whole radiator out in one shot. Alright, got everything up. Plug those 2 things right there. The actual hose itself, I dropped it down here, but I put those barbed fitting right there, and I put the clamp back on so it doesn't leak anywhere. So these things I'll just push out of the way right now while I'm working, and then we'll go ahead and pull this thing out. So remove the radiator. I think these are 12s. There's a 12 there, there's a 12 right here, and then same spot right here. I think there's a 12 there, and then a 12 up here, and just go ahead and pull it off once you undo those 4 bolts. So I took that radiator outside and I shook it upside down, and look what fell out of it right here. So the pieces of the cap fell out the spring, as well as the center of it right here. So luckily we got that all out and it didn't end up in the engine messing anything up on the coolant system. While I was in there, I also found a piece of the radiator right here. This looks like the spout where the tube was. They probably broke it when they were taking apart the hose off the old one, and it ended up inside the hose and they didn't clean it out, so it ended up at the bottom of the radiator. So I found that piece too. So luckily we got all that out. Alright, now that we got everything in here, I went ahead and just set everything at top dead center right there at 0. We want to take apart the serpentine belt. You want to pull the tensioner right here with a wrench or a ratchet, and then tuck this thing over and just slip that thing off. Just remember the order that it goes in. It's pretty simple. It just goes over and then loops this and then loops over this thing around the pulley. But overall, take that out first. Then we're gonna have to unbolt the power steering pump. There's 2 bolts behind here that you could just rotate to get to there. And then there's 3 studs that are for the AC compressor that we need to take apart. And we need to kind of drop that thing off to the side and tie it up with a bungee cord or something so it just gets out of the way so we could access the middle. once you unbolt that, the 3 bolts, this right here is a stud. The only way we really get that out to clear the AC line here is to take out that E-torque. It's an E8, so just go ahead and pull that whole stud out, and then you could take the whole pump, kind of put it off to the side here. After that, we have to take apart the alternator and kind of get that thing out of the way, so we could just remove that completely, so that's out of the way, because that thing's only attached by a couple wires. Once we're done with this side, we'll go over here, take the 3 bolts that hold the compressor to the block, kind of hang the compressor down here, and then we'll go ahead and disconnect all these different hoses that connected down here, the coolant, the oil cooler hose and all that. We got to disconnect all that so we get clearance to get into here to remove the idler pulley, and then just start removing all the different pulleys so we could get access to the timing covers. You can see I hung that thing up right there. I just hung it to that with a bungee cord, so that's out of the way for now. I got the 2 bolts for the alternator off. I need to get underneath to get that last one. Right now we're going to be blocked by this AC line, so I'm not 100% sure how we're going to get it cleared, that AC line, but we'll see what's underneath. And then while underneath, I'm gonna go ahead and try to get apart the cable that goes to the battery, and then the other plug that plugs into the alternator. We'll go ahead and get that out from the bottom. Got that alternator right there, sitting right there. I unplugged that back harness. I still need to get the side harness, but it's too hard to get to with the wheel on here, so I'm gonna go ahead and just pull it from the top. I think once it's clear now, I can pull it out from the top much easier than from the side or the bottom. So over here for the 3 bolts that hold the compressor on, there's one right behind the oil filter right here on the very bottom to get to, and the other 2 on the top, they're a little bit easier to get to from the side. So here you can see the one right there, and then the one up front on this side. There's 2 of them. That's pretty easy to get to from the side here once you take the covers off over here. I got everything unbolted, taken off. I hung this compressor by the bungee cords right here just to keep it out of the way. Just make sure you don't leave any stress on the actual AC lines or any of that stuff. I had to unbolt this line from the block right here to kind of swing it over, that goes across here for the evaporator. So pretty much it. Got the alternator out and all out of the way, just took that completely out. Left the power steering pump here, put the stud back in. The next thing you need to do, you need to undo this idler pulley right here. So that's a 14mm, and just take that out completely. Then they want to take apart the hoses and everything for the oil cooler all the way up to here. So we want to disconnect that, unbolt it from the actual block and from all these 10mm, get it out, all out of the way. And then once we do that, then we start taking the covers off for each timing cover. And then we want to shoot this guy off right here. Luckily, I took my radiator out and I could put my air impact wrench in here. We were able to get everything off. You can see when we were taking apart the hoses for the oil cooler, it was a big coolant mess. Basically dumped all the coolant that was in the front of the engine down, so make sure you're prepared for that with towels and something to drain. Luckily I put my pan down there because I knew that was going to happen, so that took care of most of it except for all the splashing, which I have a towel down there to take care of. After that, pretty much all those 10mm, take that pipe off, just disconnect it from here, from the various bolts, then we could take apart the front timing cover once we took apart that idler pulley and everything. That timing cover was just a bunch of 10 millimeters. The hardest part was this stupid plug right here that still had the little end on it that I popped off. So if you need to take that end off, you need to put a tiny screwdriver on this side from the back way here from the wires, push it in, and then raise that little clip right there up, and then that'll release the clip and let you slide it on out. Also, we've got the oil cooler and everything accessible now with everything disconnected. I'm gonna have a separate video on changing the oil seal on that. That's another thing that you kind of have to do eventually, because that oil seal is going to end up getting flat. So there's 3 seals that you got to replace there that I showed on my video with all the parts, but I'll do a separate video just to do that. When I was unplugging this harness for the throttle body, of course I broke this thing. Luckily I've got an extra one of these plugs right here that I ordered just because I knew this was going to happen. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and unbolt the rest of these timing covers right here. There's a bunch of bolts there. I'll show the diagram of that and just go ahead and take that all apart so we can expose everything on this side. Then I can pull out my air impact wrench and unbolt the main pulley down there, so we start taking that off and taking the lower cover off, and then that should give us all the access to the timing belt and water pump. Since I'm in here, as I showed on my video with all the parts, I'm going to do the front main seal. Go ahead and take care of that while everything's taken apart. Went ahead and bolted everything over here as far as the covers go. Belt pulley, the idler over here, the fan pulley over here. Went ahead and took the pipe out with the thermostat and all that, so I've got all that taken out. I'm going to go ahead and clean that stuff up, get it all prepped up on the side. So now we're ready to take apart the main pulley right there. But once we do that, then we're going to go ahead and release the hydraulic tensioner right here. There's 2 10mm bolts underneath that get that. That pretty much frees up the belt, and then we slide the belt off. We want to make sure everything's at top dead center at 0 when we do that, so that way we make sure that the cams and everything are all correctly aligned and nothing is out of place, so when we put it back together it's all in the same position. And one of the things, especially if you guys are doing this for the first time or you don't do it very often, one of the things to keep track of all my bolts and nuts is all the ones I take out, I actually put them back where they belong as much as I can. That way later on, even if I have to take apart like right here off the water pump, I know the nuts and everything are still there. Some bolts and some of them you can't keep onto here, so I try to keep them with the actual part that it comes with, so that way when I reassemble it all, I know exactly where they go and I don't lose anything. And for the cams, it's kind of hard to tell from here just because of how dirty this cam and this head is, but there's 2 dots that meet up right where the 2 gears are, right here, right somewhere right in the middle right there, right? You gotta make sure those 2 dots are lined up on both sides. That means it's at top dead center. That bolt came out really easy, much easier than I thought with that air impact. I probably could have done that by hand with the breaker bar. But anyway, so now we have to pull it out. So there's actually 2 threaded holes on that pulley. I leave the bolt in there because once I screw it in, I want something to push against and I don't want to mess up any kind of thread. So I leave the bolt in to pull it out. Once I release it, then I can take the bolt out and then we could take care of it. But yeah, you want to make sure you leave that in there. You want to make sure you get the right bolt. These are metrics. I think these are M10 1.25s, but you want to double check by threading it in to make sure it fits. So that pulley came out a lot easier than I thought too. Nothing was seized. I barely even had to pull that thing. I could have probably pulled it out by hand, but look at this thing right here. So this is the sprocket that goes right there. So this is the side that goes against the other sprocket right there. And you can see the oil has gotten into the timing belt. So this is a bad thing. If you get oil in your timing belt, it lessens the life of it. So that's probably one of the things that you have to immediately take care of, all the oil seals and oil leaks in here. All that oil looks like it's coming from the head though, but I'm gonna go ahead and change that front main seal in here anyways. So now that we're in here, we'll go ahead and loosen the tensioner down there. So there's 2 10mm to loosen that tensioner, and then we can take the belt out. we were able to get those 12 millimeters out of there for that tensioner. That's a bit hard angle to get from the top. It's much better and easier if you could get from the bottom, but I just got too much crap under there, so I did it from the top, and I injured myself on this metal thing right here when I was trying to break it. But once we get that out, pretty much releases the belt and everything's loose now, so we can just go ahead and pull the belt apart. Once we take that apart, we start taking apart the two tensioners that we got to replace. Take apart the sprocket right there so we can access the oil seal and everything on the back side of that, and then start taking apart the actual water pump once we're getting in there. At this point, we want to make sure nothing moves and everything is in the right position. You want to make sure you also line up the top dead center again. There should be a marking on that sprocket somewhere that lines up the top dead center. You want to make sure you line that up when you put it all back together. We were able to take everything out. That thing came out pretty easily over there. Went ahead and took all that stuff out. The one thing I noticed on this water pump is it doesn't say icing on it anywhere. I was surprised. This being a 2008, it would have had a newer icing one or stamped icing one, but it doesn't, so that's odd. It doesn't even look, as far as the stamping goes, to the one that we received as a replacement. So once I take it off, we'll compare side by side to see how everything looks. But overall, most of you, getting to this point, you're just going to change the water pump, the timing belt, and kind of put everything back together. For my particular case, I need to do a front main seal replacement. I'm going to do that on a separate video with a little bit more detail. For the more detail, trying to take that off, hammer the new one in, I'll have a separate video for that. In addition, as I talked earlier, I have to change the seals for the oil cooler and everything right here, so I'll have a separate video on that also. In addition, I have to do those cam seals up here just because all this crap that's going on with my head and the slush and the sludge and everything from the previous owner. I have to clean that all up, so I'm gonna go ahead and take this whole cam out and do that. I'll probably do that on a separate video too, just to speed up this whole process on the timing belt and the water pump service. I'll go ahead and continue on once I get to that point and get everything else back together, but for now I'm gonna go ahead and take care of this stuff and all those seals, so that way I can seal this baby back up and make sure I have no leaks. I'll go ahead and remove the water pump. Once you do that, there's going to be a bunch of coolant that was probably going to be leaking out that's still left in the engine block, and everything is going to drip down, so make sure you have your pan ready. Once I do that, I'm going to go clean up all this oil. There's a shitload of oil here that we need to take care of, and just make sure everything's clean before we put it all back together, just so we know that everything's new and clean and fresh, and if we see any leaks, we could identify it really easily. So we got everything unbolted for the water pump. It's still stuck in there. I'm not sure if, I think these are just studs that hold this thing on, but there is a little spot right here that you could put a pry bar or a big screwdriver in to kind of pop it. There's an actual little tab that you could pop open, so I'm gonna try that now. Got everything unbolted. You end up having to take apart all the studs, all the E-Torques, except for this one back here. This one for some reason didn't come out. I tried to take it off and I actually snapped the head. It's got a different bolt and it also has a different material, so I don't think it's intended to come out easily. It must be thread locked in there, but I did break that off, so if I ever had to work on that or replace that for any reason, it's gonna have to come out with some vice grips and get replacement one, because the nut on here is not the same aluminum coated nut, it's actually a steel nut. But yeah, the hardest part was trying to release it from this guy right here. That thing is the feed tube right there has got an O-ring on it, and it wouldn't come out. I actually had to pull it out and then create a gap between here, put the pry bar in with a piece of fabric in there so I didn't damage the surfaces, and pull it out. Once we get it all out, we need to clean up all the old rubber that's melted on here, that's stuck on here, with a razor blade. Just make sure the whole surface is brand new and clean. Clean it with some super clean or some degreaser just to clean it all up, so that way we can get the new one in here with that having a good mating surface for the gasket and everything. So here's all the old timing equipment that we took out. As you can see, that this one right here is the OEM water pump from Ison. No Aisin stamp right here or Toyota right here. We do have a date code over here. I'm assuming this is 2007, the 12th month, which matches the year of this car. This car is a 2008, so this is an original water pump in my opinion. There was nothing when I was taking this all apart that suggested this thing's ever been replaced. All the bolts and everything were original, no markings, no nothing from anybody messing with it before. Over here we've got the NTN tensioner, which is the same one we're replacing with. As far as the two bearings go, or the idlers, the idler one is a Koyo. That's the same one that we're replacing, as well as the tensioner. The tensioner is an NSK, which is the same NSK that we're replacing right here, same model and everything, so it's exact same what came out of here. As far as the timing belt go, this is all original. You can see right here where they're stitched together, it's starting to come apart and unravel, so we're just replacing it just in time. All that oil has kind of gotten this edge all slick too, so that oil is going to end up destroying this belt if it leaks in there too much. As far as the markings on here, I found all the OEM markings. The print is gone, but the imprint is still there, so you can faintly see Toyota. You can see the part number, which is 13568-520. Do not bend and crimp. Then you got all the other markings right there as far as the warnings go, just like the one that we got new. The only thing that we don't have on here where it says made in the USA, this is not made in the USA. Then we got the C05, D06 and the other markings. I'm assuming those are batch numbers, serial numbers for the actual belt manufacturing. That's the original. This is the made in the USA one that I went over on my video when I was going over all the parts for this. So here's that new OEM one that I went over on my other video where I went over all the markings and everything. No icing over here, which matches this side over here. The main difference I can see is the texture on this made in the USA one. It is totally different than the one over here. As far as the actual bearing and the everything here, this thing's got a BWF H353, which is the same numbers on here on the new one, so that's a matching bearing right there. On my other video I had gone over, they don't have that clock anymore, the numbers on here. They do have a print right here, which I assume this is the date code. It's got 4H22X, which I'm assuming is the 2022 production. And then on the back side, you can see the casting of this. I explained on my other video how this thing made in the USA quality. The casting is kind of suspect as far as the machining and everything they did there compared to the Japanese one, which is a pretty clean machine. Even though it's been used for 16 years, everything looks good here. The center part of here is totally different too. The texture and the material on the new one is different as far as that goes, and even the direction and the right here where it approaches the impeller, this side approaches differently and it's got a deeper groove, where this guy's got a transition right here and then it goes smooth. But overall, if you want to watch my other video where I go through all the new parts, go ahead and check that video out. But right now we got all these parts right here we got to get back in. So we got the thermostat housing right here. I didn't separate it on the car, but once we get it off, it actually attaches to the car and attaches to the new water pump. Once you get the water pump on there, you put this on last, along with some form in place gasket right there. You got to clean off this side of it to get onto the vehicle, and then change that O-ring that comes with the new water pump right here. So here's that thermostat I took out. This thing is the same brand. The only difference is the one that came out of it originally, everything's stamped in there, the 82, the brand. The new replacement one is just printed on there. It's the same brand and everything, and all that is labeled Toyota, but it's all printed on versus being actual stamped in there. So on the back side, you can see just minor construction changes since this thing was new. Again, as I explained in my other video, these thermostats come without the gasket, so when you're ordering these from the manufacturer or from the dealer or OEM, you gotta remember to pick up the gasket too. One of the things you want to do as far as draining everything, as far as coolant goes, you want to go ahead and drain the block too. So on either side of the block right here under the headers, there's that little spout right there. You can put a tube on it and then release that with a 10mm. Just loosen it and it should drain out the block for you. So you want to do that on both sides just to get all the old coolant out. Driver side tube's a little bit harder to get to back there just because there's like a wire harness and then a shield and everything over here on this side. So you gotta kind of sneak in underneath or through the wheel well to try to get that one. All right, now that I took everything with the cam seals and all the stuff I had up here, I'll have a separate video doing that part or detailing that part. If you have to do the cam seals and all this other stuff, that's a big pain in the ass. It took me forever to do that, but we're gonna go ahead and get the water pump onto here. And you can see I left all the studs kind of in there so I wouldn't lose them or forget them. So we'll go ahead and take all those out, go ahead and get this thing back in there. This thing comes with 5 new bolts. So the 5 bolts go here, 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 and then these 2 on the over here. This one's a stud that's on the block already, so there's a nut for it, so you don't have to worry about putting that on, but you want to get those on first. Then after that, we go ahead and put on all the different studs and bolts that go into there. As we're going in there, don't forget to change the O-ring. There's an O-ring on this thing that slides into the water pump, so you gotta go ahead and change that. Maybe put a little bit of silicone grease on it just in case to slide it through. But once you get that, get everything on, and then we'll do this part up here, which is the water neck and the thermostat. After that, that's gonna need some form in place gasket. All right, so we got this baby in there. So the next thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and torque down those 5 bolts I put on. The 2 studs that we put in here, these ones right here and this one right here, that's 13 foot-pounds. So we wanna go ahead and torque those things down. And after this, we get the rest of the stuff on as well as the timing belt and start putting this all back together. Next thing we gotta do is put on the new idlers. So this idler right here uses the stock bolt right here, and then this one uses that 10mm hex right here. Make sure you put a little bit of blue Loctite onto here according to the instructions. So we'll go ahead and put a couple drops onto there. Remember, this washer goes on the inside and then this goes through out here once we put it in there, and they both torque down to 25 foot-pounds. The next thing we need to do is get the timing belt in here. So you want to make sure this thing is straight top dead center. So right now we need to kind of move this a little bit over right here to line up with that mark. This thing is right on the mark right there, but once we put it on, the belt has markings to make sure that we're aligned with these marks as well as the marks down at the crank. So right now the crank is vertical at 90 degrees. We want to go ahead and turn that over to top dead center, which is the dot right here also, once we get everything aligned. In the service manual, it tells you to kind of set this thing 1 tooth over clockwise, and on this side 1/2 a tooth over clockwise, which will make installing the belt a little bit easier. So we'll go ahead and set that, and then also set that down there to the top dead center dot. So once we get here, go ahead and check the markings on your belt, and then we'll line it up and get it onto here. Once you get it in here, make sure that thing lines up perfectly with the right cam. Over here, also the left cam. And then underneath, you have to get under the car to see the dot. But there's a dot on the bottom of this pulley, and then the marking on the bottom of it also. We've checked that it's lined up and everything. We're gonna go ahead and get the hydraulic tensioner onto here. So we gotta get that with the 2 bolts underneath, and then tighten that down and torque it. And then we'll pretty much have the timing belt in. Once we got that thing torqued down to 19 foot-pounds, those 2 bolts, go ahead and just pull the grenade pin right here. Go ahead and pull it out, and the tension will build up, and we're pretty much set on this. So the next thing we need to do is test this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and spin the crank pulley 2 full revolutions to get the engine turned around back to this spot again, to make sure that we didn't skip any or miss anything. So we'll go ahead and spin this thing 2 full revolutions. I did 1 full revolution. It is a big pain in the ass. I should have pulled the spark plugs to do this, but oh well. It's a good workout to do this. But right now, 1 full revolution, we look pretty good as far as timing. Everything is lined up correctly still, so we'll go ahead and finish the 2nd revolution. All right, after 2 full rotations, we're still pretty much lined up. Top dead center, top dead center. This thing right here lined up with that dot. So we're pretty much set on this. So we're good here. We'll go ahead and go to the next step and get some of the stuff all put back together and start reassembling this thing. First few steps is getting the timing guard back on here, getting the little spacer plate right here, and the cover back on with the 410 millimeters before we put the pulley and everything back together down there. So we'll go ahead and time lapse do that and get that done down there. Thing we gotta do is put this pulley back on, right? So it uses this right here, which I think is a 17 or a 14 millimeter, the bigger bolt, and then here's the skinnier bolt. I think this is a 12 millimeter, and then it uses the 2 studs. It uses a stud right here and a stud right there. So we'll go ahead and get that thing onto there as the next step. We got that bracket on, so the 12 millimeters were 12 foot-pounds and the 14 millimeters were 24, so you had that one right there, and the bolt at the bottom like I showed earlier. I went ahead and put this tensioner on. It just uses 2 nuts right here into the studs, and then one 4.17 inch bolt, which is a 106 millimeter bolt that goes on the back side under here, and all 3 of those were 11 foot-pounds. Next part we have is this plastic timing cover that goes right over this part, and we use 2 106 millimeter or 4.17 inch bolts to 11 or 12 foot-pounds into these slots right here, and it goes into the block or the head right there. Thing I need to do is put the thermostat housing on. So we need to put some form in place gasket around here, take off this O-ring and replace it so we can get it on the new one into the actual neck over there, and then bolt this thing down. Once you get on here, you got about 5 minutes to get it back onto the vehicle before the stuff starts drying up. Next, we want to go ahead and install a thermostat. So you want to make sure you install it with the jiggle valve, which is this little valve right here, within 30 degrees from either side of vertical. So don't go any further than 30 degrees. So you just keep it right in the middle, should be good. we got the covers on this side. We got that connector hose down to the oil cooler, everything bolted back up. Rerouted all the wire harness along with all the clips and everything down to there. Make sure you plug everything back up, the oil sensor or the crank position sensor down there. Make sure you plug in this cam position sensor here, and everything's good. Remember, we broke these clips right here on the throttle body and the VVTI. I'll go ahead and have a separate video to how to replace these things to do that, if you want to check that out later when I post that. But pretty much all done on this side. We'll go on to the next step up. The next thing we got to do down here is go ahead and get all the compressor, the alternator, the power steering pump and everything put back in. Make sure all the brackets and everything that we had to loosen up are all put back in place, and torque everything back together. As I go through each step, I'll post up the instructions off to the side as well as the torque specs so you can see what you're doing. We'll go ahead and just time lapse through all this. AC compressor, it's easy to get that bolt right there from the top, but the other two you have to get underneath here. It's kind of a pain in the ass. If you remember taking it out, putting it back together is just as hard. You have to get the two right here, really just one, but the other one's the bracket right there, and then the one on the back of the actual compressor, which is easily reached from the top here inside the wheel well. So you gotta reach into there and get that bolt and then tighten it all up. But it's been a big pain in the ass trying to get it tightened down here. But we wanna get these down tightened. I think it's 39 foot-pounds on these. We finally got everything back together, got the belt put on here, got the fan all bolted down with those 4 12mm bolts there, and pretty much got the radiator, the hoses and everything in place. So everything's perfect and good up here as far as the timing belt, the water pump and all this goes. Next thing I need to do is go ahead and fill this thing up. Since we drained the block and drained everything out of this motor, we probably got to put close to 3 gallons back into here as far as the coolant goes. And this is the premix pink coolant for this model year. This is the 2008 version. If you got an earlier year where it uses the old red that you have to mix, then you have to get that type. But in 2006 they switched to this pink that we're using now. But we'll go ahead and take care of that. I still have the valve covers taken off on here. I gotta go ahead and put that back together. I have a separate video kind of detailing all of that, as well as changing the spark plugs and all that. So we'll go ahead and check that out, along with the cam seals and some of the other stuff that I did on here while we were in here. I did do the oil seals for the filter down there. I did the oil seals up here. That was a bunch of work. Now we got everything put back together. Pretty much last thing we need to do is fill this thing up with coolant. You want to have at least 3 gallons on hand since we drained everything. So I'm gonna go ahead and start filling it up now as much as I can. And then we're gonna have to start the engine up, check the oil. We probably need to add a little bit of oil in here just to clean everything up. I think I'm gonna put in some diesel just to clean up all the valves and all that gunk in there. And then go ahead and change the oil right after that. So it took about 2.5 gallons to get it up to this point, and it pretty much filled the top of the block, the whole radiator. So we're gonna have to start it up, let everything circulate, and then just kind of let this kind of bubble out. I'm gonna leave the cap off of it while it's running. Once we run it, it levels out and it kind of burps and bubbles out any air bubbles in the system. We'll go ahead and add a little bit more, put the cap on, and let the system pressurize. Started it up and no issues, everything ran perfectly fine, so that means everything's kind of put back together right, no issues so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and fill this up, let it idle for a little bit to circulate and get all the bubbles out with the funnel, and then I'm going to put some diesel fuel in here to clean the valves because I had that whole caked up sludge issue in here. I'm going to run like a quart of diesel in here because we did lose like a quart of it by taking apart all the oil and everything and draining everything on the bottom there when we were doing the oil seal on the filter. So we'll go ahead and just run that for like an hour or so, and then go ahead and change the oil after, once that diesel goes in there, to clean up a little bit of that detergent. I let it run for like 5 minutes, and this thing ended up filling up and overflowing into that funnel. So I had to use this little bulb sucker right here to move some of that fluid over to the reservoir right here since we didn't have a cap on it. I'm gonna go ahead and just put that brand new Denso cap, OEM Denso cap that I got. Go ahead and put it onto here, and then now we'll just go ahead and just let it idle and let everything kind of flow through. But that should be tight. Once that pressurizes now, it's going to overflow any of that into the reservoir here, and we're pretty much good. I think I got all the bubbles out by letting it run and leaving that thing open like that. All right, I've let this thing run several times for 30 to 40 minutes at a time just to make sure I got all that diesel that I put in there to clean the valves and clean all the oil and gunk out of here, circulate it through the engine, as well as get the coolant to go through here. So pretty much filled everything back up, made sure that the reservoir was filled up and didn't drop too low. So right now I'm like halfway between minimum and maximum, which is good. So just keep an eye on that when you change your fluid, just to make sure that you have enough in the reservoir for any kind of overage or underage. It sucks it back up. Anyways, everything else in here looks pretty good so far. No major oil leaks from the valve covers or anything where we were having it before we started this job. No coolant leaks or anything. Everything looks pretty tight. No check engine lights, none of that. So everything's put back together correctly. So I'm pretty much good here. Hey guys, thanks for watching all the way to the end of this video on doing the timing belt and water pump service. As you can see, it's a pretty simple job if you have all the right tools, and you could probably do this in a couple hours. For me, this thing took me several weeks to do this. I was working on it several steps at a time every night, as well as cleaning up everything I had to clean up and waiting for parts, which took the longest right there, just waiting for the parts that I messed up or I screwed up on or I needed. Anyways, if you guys found this video useful, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, turn on bell notifications to get notified every time I upload a video. For all these different projects, if I can do it, you guys can do it. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.